Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets is a best-selling novel published in 1998, just over a year after the first book's release. The same can be said about the release of the film adaptations of these books, with basically the same production team working on the sequel as the first film. The same writer, the same producer, the same director, and the majority of the cast remained the same too. This analysis will be covering the differences between the two mediums, as well as outlining some of the strengths and weaknesses that both have. Spoilers will obviously follow from now on, so if you have a phobia of knowing a story that you should probably know by now, get reading and come back when you're done. Also be sure to watch my review of the first story, as I make points in this review that refer to my initial review. Without further ado, we'll take a shot at this piece of childhood nostalgia and check if the post-mortem brings us closer to knowing who killed... Wait, this is getting really dark now. Let's crack on with the review. The film opens with a long establishing shot of Little Winging accompanied by that unforgettable score from John Williams. If the music wasn't so engrossing and beautiful, I would be tempted to say this film lacks originality in that aspect, but it immediately invites us into the magical adventure that awaits us. The establishing shot seems to identify that the area Harry lives in is very dull and boring, considering for miles and miles the same design of house stretches into the horizon. It also emphasises the entrapment Harry faces when living with the Dursleys. The camera flies down to Harry's window and into his bedroom, where Hedwig noisily complains to him whilst trying to look at some old photographs. The novel, however, opens at breakfast, where, after the first story's events, the word magic is religiously prohibited within the household as it causes Dudley to faint. What the film seems to take advantage of, however, is that it doesn't spend time reminding us of what previously happened. At several points in the book we are brought back up to speed with descriptions of the last book's events, but you'd have thought a best-selling novel wouldn't need it, considering so many people bought it and read it. The only reason I can think of for Rowling to do this is in case the reader of Chamber of Secrets hasn't read the first novel. I don't know what kind of idiot would want to read the second novel before the first, but it seems like a waste of time to bother with summarised events that readers already know about. When Harry goes downstairs to rehearse the dinner party, Shaw and Griffiths once again perform spectacularly in the opening scenes in showing the awful treatment of Harry despite their initial fear of him. The book does a better job at describing Harry's loneliness because Daniel Radcliffe's performance is once again rather stale compared to the rest of the cast. There will be certain moments when this becomes a lot more evident, and I will point them out when I get to them. For now, let's return to another point that I made in my last Harry Potter review, and that is why Harry was sent back to these horrid people for the summer instead of staying at Hogwarts. I'm sure there's an explanation in one of the Harry Potter books that I'm slowly plodding my way through, but so far I'm confused as to why he can't just stay at Hogwarts instead. It makes less sense in the books because he's given homework to complete over the summer period. How can you practice magic you've learned if you can't even cast spells outside of school? Unfortunately, his school stuff is also locked away in his original bedroom, the cupboard under the stairs. Why would he be expected to complete these tasks despite the Hogwarts staff are fully aware of his situation, when at Hogwarts he would be able to complete his homework without the potential of being locked in his room? Harry returns to his new room after being reminded of what to do whilst the dinner party takes place: pretend he doesn't exist. When he enters, he sees the Harry Potter equivalent of Jar Jar Binks jumping on his bed. Some might mistake Dobby for simply bouncing on Harry's bed, but to me I see him celebrating his arrival in Harry's room. In the book he is simply standing on it, but this is something very nitpicky, and I'd rather praise Toby Jones's voice acting and the CGI team for putting Dobby together. From what I know, all Dobby was at the time of shooting would either be a figurine that would be later animated or a ball on a stick. Jones would then speak whilst watching the first cut of the scene, and then the CGI team would animate it. This is pretty cool, but something else I noticed whilst rewatching this film is that he has this glitter stuff animated around him. I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but just a little Easter egg for anybody that's interested. His interpretation in the film is pretty faithful to his description in the books, so I don't have any complaints about Dobby. Dobby runs out of the room and starts making the cake float. Something that I think this film has improved upon since the last one is its, in inverted commas, movie mistakes. There are still a few continuity issues, but they certainly aren't as stubbornly obvious as the first movie. As for deleted scenes, however, there are still plenty of them, and a lot more of them don't seem to add much to the film this time around. But the extended cut racks up the runtime to almost 3 hours. I'll go through them all anyway, as they're still important to the telling of the story, in my opinion. Our first one is more of an extended scene than a deleted one, where in which the hovering cake takes an unearthly length of time to move over to Mrs. Mason's head. Meanwhile, the Dursleys try to keep up their appearance by making small talk to distract the Masons before the cake lands on her head. In the book, the cake lands all over Harry instead, and when the Masons and the Dursleys move into another room, a bird flies through the window, which scares off the Masons and delivers a letter from the Ministry of Magic giving Harry a warning about using magic outside of school. This introduces the Ministry long before it's first mentioned in the film, and it gives incentive for Vernon to lock Harry in his room after learning that he can't use magic outside of school. Vernon then puts bars on Harry's windows as punishment for his misbehaviour. In the book, Harry's door also has a cat flap installed for food and drink, as well as a dream describing Harry being trapped in a zoo with the Dursleys rattling on his cage before waking up to Ron in the flying car. They pull the bars off Harry's windows, which wakes up the Dursleys, who in turn try to prevent him from escaping. I'd argue that Vernon should be grateful that he no longer has to deal with Harry's non-Muggle characteristics if he lets them escape, but I think he becomes so obsessive that he needs to control this child that he basically didn't want. The book version doesn't have Vernon falling out of the house, and instead has Fred and George pick the lock on Harry's cupboard where all his stuff is whilst the family sleeps. The Weasleys' house has a wonderful feel to it, and I commend the set designer's efforts to make it look as compact and rural as possible. The tilted staircase, the mess and books stacked everywhere, the odd assortment of chairs, and the tacky oddments lying around just adds so much to the scene itself. Julie Waters is brilliant in her portrayal of Mrs. Weasley, although I think some of her lines could have been delivered a bit more sincerely. I know that this is the typical sort of thing Fred and George would get up to, and that she's probably more easily forgiving in that regard, but considering that this car has a lot more implications to do with Arthur Weasley's job in the books, it just seems like Mrs. Weasley in this scene specifically isn't as pissed off as maybe she could be. Another thing I think could have been improved upon was Ginny. In the book, she seems to have some kind of childish crush on Harry going on that recurs throughout. However, in the film, she looks absolutely terrified of him. We don't really see much of their interaction between this scene that we see here and after the basilisk is defeated either. I myself have never been a girl her age, so I wouldn't know if it was an accurate response to seeing a boy you fancy, but it just seems a little bit suppressed in the film considering they get married and have kids at the end of the series. Arthur then comes home from work, and I think his character is introduced splendidly. Upon hearing that his sons flew the car to rescue Harry the night before, he immediately asks, "How did it go?" And Molly then smacks him lightly on the shoulder, and he condemns their actions to a certain extent. This not only beautifully describes the state their marriage is in, but also shows how this cheeky attitude has been passed down onto Fred and George. It shows more of a concrete family unit in the story instead of all the actors just coincidentally having red hair. Arthur works in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, where he tampers and confiscates items that have charms or curses placed on them. The true curse here lies in Arthur's obsession with enchanting objects, like the Ford Anglia and a lot of oddments that you see around the house, and that if they were to be seen or left in the hands of Muggles, he could be held accountable and lose his job. This becomes more important later, but let's move on to Floo powder and gnomes. When I speak of gnomes, I mean a small task that Harry, Ron, and the twins are given in the books to throw all the gnomes they find in the garden over a hedge as punishment for using the flying car. It's not exactly a necessary part of the plot, but it's a fun little read for the book's target audience. Before setting off to Diagon Alley by Floo powder, in the book it becomes abundantly clear why the Weasleys are so poor. It states that they have half a dozen bacon sandwiches each before leaving, and there are 8 people to feed, which totals to 48 bacon sandwiches. Normally just a couple of bacon sandwiches cures me of my hunger, but bacon isn't cheap, darling, so unless you're slaughtering that little piggy outside your house yourself, I am now starting to feel a little less sympathetic towards your family's economic status. Then again, we've seen wizards magic food out of thin air at Hogwarts, so maybe I should suspend my disbelief for a bit longer, and I do like the Weasley family, but I just thought I'd point out, 48 bacon sandwiches. That's all I'm saying.
That's it. Very good. And don't forget to speak very, very clearly.
Diagonally.
Oh, Jesus, Radcliffe, how did you cock that line up so badly? At least in the book, he stutters in his nervousness. That makes sense, because it wasn't clear. Like, diagonally, slip up my own words there. You literally just said the word diagonally. Who wrote this bloody script? When Harry arrives in the shop in Nocturne Alley, he wanders around for a bit and then a sleazy jump scare pops up when the Hand of Glory grabs his hand. It seems a lot cheaper than the last film's jump scare with the screaming book, because there's nothing aesthetically pleasing to go with it. After Harry escapes its clutches, we have yet another deleted scene where Draco Malfoy snoops around the shop and Lucius comes in too to trade some valuables rituals he doesn't want the Ministry to find in case they raid his house. When Draco touches the first object, Lucius comes charging in as if he already knew that Draco's touching something despite he knew exactly where to go upon entrance. It appears that the trader also has teleporting powers, considering 2 seconds ago he moves to the back of his shop, then as soon as Harry leaves, he appears to his right. I'm not sure if this was done to make this throwaway character spookier, but it just doesn't make sense why he'd suddenly appear there so quickly. Harry leaves the shop and gets trundled around by ex-Slytherins before Hagrid shows up and takes him to Diagon Alley. The music, lighting and brilliant set design once again welcomes the audience back to this wonderful world of magical consumerism. Hermione fixes Harry's glasses and they walk into Flourish and Blotts, where we meet possibly one of the most frustrating but brilliantly written characters of the series, Gilderoy Lockhart. I say frustrating because he embodies almost everything that I hate about celebrity culture, but I say brilliantly written because he is made a total farce of throughout by our two protagonists, Harry and Ron. Not only is the writing great, but Kenneth Branagh does an excellent job at playing his character. Considering I assume that he's probably had his own run-ins with celebrity bullshit in his life, so I can guess he brings those experiences of the false face he must put on in his character. Before Malfoy makes his second appearance, I thought I'd point out that there's a lovely part in the book after Harry has his encounter with Lockhart where he gives all his books that he gained free of charge to Ginny, claiming he'll buy his own. It not only makes her leave him alone comment make so much more sense, but once again it's missed moments like this that ruin their chemistry when they suddenly start kissing in film 6. Also, if you listen closely, Mrs. Weasley calls her own son John when she tells them to wait outside.
Harry, yes, now you give me those, and I'll get them signed. All of you wait outside. That's it, John. That's it, John. That's it, John.
Lucius then waltzes into the shop and produces a brilliantly delivered piece of dialogue that truly describes who he is and what he stands for. He is openly anti-muggle and anti-poor, which kind of rings alarm bells for anybody who actually cares about other human beings. It's great, however, seeing how little Draco has to do and say in this scene, considering his father is an even bigger twat than his son is. In the book, Arthur has a fight with Lucius and Hagrid has to break it up. I have mixed feelings about this because, on the one hand, Arthur's emotion seems very justifiable considering how much of a knobhead Lucius is, but at the same time, I like to think of Arthur as an innocent man who knows when it is appropriate to pick a fight, and in front of your kids is probably not the best time. When they get to the station, I just need to make a quick point that, I don't know if any book readers notice this, Harry stays at the Weasleys for a good 4 weeks or so, yet the film, between the point in time Harry was rescued from the Dursleys up until the point the portal closes at the station, seems to happen within a matter of hours. Harry and Ron then crash into a wall and this pudgy bugger comes along and tells them off again. This time it seems a bit more like the guard is actually doing his job because they look like they're actually mucking about. Harry and Ron then decide to take the car to Hogwarts instead, and we have this incredibly exciting and beautifully shot sequence of the two trying to catch the train. Harry nearly falls out, and I'm sure the stunt and CGI team had their work cut out when trying to get this all animated. I think the best part of this sequence is that when we think it's all over and they're safe at Hogwarts again, the car starts to lose its power and they land in the Whomping Willow. A lot of the interior shots of the attack remind me of being in a car whilst going through one of those cleaning machines at petrol stations, and I remember vividly going through them as a child and thinking the machine would cause me harm. This is why I personally found this scene quite gripping, as I empathised with the fear that Harry and Ron were going through at this point. The unfortunate nag I have at this point is that Grint and Radcliffe's lipstick looks bloody obvious when they're being bashed around, as well as their voices breaking as they scream for their lives.
It's not working!
I think the sound design is great here too, because you can distinctly hear the sound of growling, moaning at a low pitch, allowing the trees' size and monstrous strength to really strike fear in the audience. If the sound wasn't there, it might have looked rather comical. After the car leaves into the forest, Harry and Ron try to sneakily make their way into the castle, but Filch stops them in their tracks, delivering them to Snape. In the book, it is Snape who finds them trying to enter the castle, but I think the film makes up for this mistake by including this memorable quote.
Oh dear, we are in trouble.
I really appreciate David Bradley's performance as Filch in the first two films because there's something slightly disturbing about a man and his cat wandering the corridors making sure the students are in the right places, who also has torture tools in his office and would happily use them on students who misbehave. Snape gives them a good telling off and Alan Rickman's performance is once again outstanding. I don't need to say much more on this because I don't think my opinion really changes on this subject throughout the films, but I think it's great watching Rickman slither around this table to truly terrify the boys. The headmaster and head of Gryffindor then come into the room, and for some reason Harry needs to remind the audience who these two characters are.
Professor Dumbledore. Professor McGonagall.
I mean, Filch or Snape don't get an introductory gasp from either of our protagonists. Why was this tiny bit of dialogue put in here? Anyway, they are let off for showing their dedication to their school, and we have an extended scene here that I'll delve into more when we get to the Death Day party. Book readers will know what I'm talking about here, but Filch is in fact a squib, a pureblood that has little to no magical powers. This is why we see the envelope of Quickspell in front of Filch's feet as he's learning to cast magic. In the book also, McGonagall magics plates of sandwiches out of thin air to Harry and Ron, and I just can't think why wizards aren't helping the poor and hungry in the world right now. Then again, when the wizarding world is filled with corrupt people like the Malfoy family, it comes across as no surprise why they have no affiliation with muggles who don't have any money or food. In the book, Sprout is seen curing the sling-covered Whomping Willow due to the damages Harry and Ron cause. She comes towards the class followed by Lockhart, claiming he showed her how to heal the tree despite knowing next to nothing about the tree, which certainly shows the start of his fraudulent tendencies. Inside the greenhouse, Hermione gets awarded 10 points to her house, and I'd really like to know how house points are kept track of, because I know for a fact that every school I went to with house points was mainly down to the students, who would either lie or just not bother telling anybody about them. Are the teachers in charge of it? I'm sure it's stated in a future book, or I've just missed a slight detail, but if anybody knows, please let me know. Neville then passes out because I can only assume he's never been to enough rock concerts to become attuned to loud noises. Back in the Great Hall, we're introduced to Colin Creevey, who once again brings this theme of celebrity to the forefront of the film. In the book, it's more blatantly apparent that he's obsessed with Harry. He knows everything about him and doesn't leave him alone throughout the entire story. The same can kind of be said for Lockhart really, but I can see this film being quite a major turn-off for audiences if they made Colin and Lockhart more frequently occurring characters, especially with the large amount of plot points the film has to get through. I can only assume that Rowling herself is writing from experience in becoming a celebrity so quickly after the success of the first book. Ron's Howler arrives, and we at last see the scary side of Mrs. Weasley. The humiliation and fear that Ron must be going through is unthinkable. I remember hating this part as a child because feeling the wrath of a parent is truly terrifying, especially all the love and care they put into looking after you, and this emotion can be quite startling. I don't quite understand why Mrs. Weasley thinks it's necessary to congratulate Ginny for making it into Gryffindor despite her 6 other children made it into that house, so it was obvious Ginny too would be a Gryffindor. I do think, however, the Howler would be an excellent method of discipline, and it would certainly be interesting to see if it comes around later in the series. Kenneth Branagh's true time to shine comes in his first scene teaching. The photographs and the giant painting of himself, his delivery of his lines as well as his physicality make him a character you love to hate. If the reading list from the book had been included, this line would have made more sense.
But I don't talk about that. I didn't get rid of the band and banshee by smiling at them.
Because this is the title of one of his books, Break with a Banshee. Lockhart then holds the most narcissistic quiz in the history of Hogwarts, which truly is the cherry on the cake for this scene. Unfortunately, it's not part of the theatrical cut, but basically they include some of the most fantastic questions ever. One that particularly makes me laugh asks, when is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday and what would his ideal gift be? The classroom's reactions to being given the quizzes are excellent and appropriate for each character. I wish this part of the scene was included, but like I said earlier, it might annoy some audience members. The Pixies then get let loose, and this scene is shown in a much more dramatic light than in the book. I think that the music is mainly to blame for this because the piece that's played here could have been a lot more playful and comedic, but the dramatic element fits my favourite shot in the scene when the dinosaur skeleton falls to the ground in slow motion. I do wish though that Branagh would find something else to do other than stand still and look worried in this shot here though. We have a few changes to the Mudblood scene that need pointing out, as it takes place on the Quidditch pitch in the book and feels the need to explain the rules of Quidditch, once again punishing fans by pandering to new readers. I also don't quite understand why Malfoy's voice becomes that of a burly Londoner instead of being a posh twat like he was in the first film.
It's true then, what they're saying on the train. Harry Potter has come to Hogwarts. Think my name's funny, do you? With no need to ask you yours. You'll soon find out that some wizarding families are better than others, Potter.
That's right. And that's not all that's new this year.
Ron starts throwing up slugs, so he needs to see Hagrid, as opposed to Madame Pomfrey in the hospital wing. I also don't get why Hagrid bothers growing pumpkins in the book. They can magic pretty much any food out of thin air in the Great Hall. He then gives some wise words of wisdom to Hermione, and Coltrane still plays Hagrid excellently. He's just so lovable. Harry, whilst in detention however, starts hearing voices. I really like this shot here because it identifies Harry as the only one who can hear the voice before we get this information through dialogue straight afterwards. Harry meets up with his other fellow bad child actors in the corridor and finds some spiders. Before we get to this next part, I'm going to hand you over to my arch nemesis, the critic, who will tell you all about a massive part that was missed from the film.
Thank you, Harry. The segment known as the Death Day Party is entirely missed. Harry gets invited to Nearly Headless Nick's party, celebrating 500 years since his death. Filch finds him muddy from the Quidditch practice that isn't even mentioned beforehand, and Harry finds the letter that we saw in the film earlier, showing that Filch can't properly cast magic. In the shame of Harry's knowledge, Filch releases him and Harry, Ron and Hermione turn up to the party. It's beautifully described as this sad event involving hundreds of ghosts who float through rotting food to get a glimpse of tasting food again. Moaning Myrtle makes her first appearance here as well, and the Headless Hunt arrive, who previously turned down Nicholas in joining the Headless Hunt because he's not fully headless. They completely shame Nicholas in front of all the other party guests as he tries to give out his speech. An emotional turn of events before Harry, Ron and Hermione leave the party and find Mrs. Norris petrified on the wall. And now back to the king of nitpicks.
Thank you. Now, I think this is a great segment that probably would have consumed a large amount of the budget, but I'm perfectly okay with it not being there in the film as it doesn't contribute much to the main story. It's not entirely necessary either, but it was fascinating to read. I hope in the future of Harry Potter that Nicholas eventually joins the Headless Hunt somehow, because I felt very sorry for him whilst reading the Death Day Party chapter. Time for Transfiguration class, and Hermione decides to question McGonagall about the Chamber of Secrets, who explains the history of Hogwarts to the class. The story of the Chamber of Secrets makes more sense being told by the ghostly history of magic teacher in the book, who denies its existence entirely. But it's not a massive issue because it's just backstory, and I thought I'd mention the difference to anybody that's interested, really. Ron transforms his rat into a rat cup, and whilst everybody else is laughing at him, I'm more concerned about his poor rat. I mean, I know I'm not a massive advocate for animal rights or anything, but if this was made today, Peter would be on this shit immediately. For God's sake, look at all those animals in cages! We then take a quick trip to the library, where Hermione just simply picks up a book on how to make Polyjuice Potion. I mean, it's not exactly like it could be easily abused or anything, to a point that it needs to be put in the restricted section or anything. Thank God it is put in there in the books. So the trio convinced Lockhart, very easily mind you, to sign them a piece of paper allowing them access to the book. Anyway, we now come to possibly my favourite Quidditch match in the series. It was a muggy sort of day, with a hint of thunder in the air. The match itself is fantastic, not only because Harry's arch enemy is on the other team, building tension and character because of it, but mainly because of the bludger. It's excellent seeing something that can break your arm so easily let loose on Harry alone, as it adds even more tension to the match. The bludger knocks through the stands of the audience as well as the chassis of the stadium itself, breaking its own magical programming in order to attack Harry. The match is even worse for Harry in the book, as he has rain to deal with too, but to include it would probably be more hassle on the design team's part to have this match shot in the rain. It's a lot easier to shoot CG scenes under brighter lighting conditions in a studio as far as I'm aware. The match itself seems a lot more exciting than the last because of the conditions that are set out, and it's reflective by the amount of effort put in on behalf of the visual effects team, who state they shot all of this before post-production to give the film a better Quidditch match. Where in the previous film the shots contained characters entirely computer generated in some shots and the actual actors in others, this one seems to blend the two together in a variety of ways, making it look more realistic than the previous installment. Harry and Malfoy then dive into the belly of the stadium chasing the snitch, and I thought this part was excellent to watch, as there are bits of wood blocking the way, the bludger obviously still on Harry's tail, all of it an excellent viewing experience to say the least. The film surpasses the book's descriptive capabilities in this regard because the destruction the bludger causes and the part under the belly of the stadium aren't in the book. Harry ends up in the hospital wing, and Pomfrey says something I sometimes say to people when they're disappointed.
Well, what do you expect? Pumpkin juice?
Harry then gets a visit from Dobby, but disappears just as Colin gets dragged into the hospital. Before we get to the creation of the Polyjuice Potion, we need to grab the ingredients. In the film, they just seem to appear out of thin air, But in the book, we have a scene showing why Hermione was put in Gryffindor and not Ravenclaw. In a potions class, Harry distracts the class with one of Fred and George's firecrackers, whilst Hermione goes through Snape's stashes of potions for the ingredients she needs. I can assume this was missed because of the swelling potion that gets splashed over Malfoy and Goyle. I can imagine this being a bit of a time-consuming scene, as well as it possibly looking quite tacky. Speaking of looks, the Chamber of Secrets still looks great for a film that was made in just under a year after the first film. Having said that though, the cast and the majority of the sets are exactly the same as the ones used in the first movie, not to mention the amount of money the first movie made. Inside the brewery, the ghost of Moaning Myrtle makes her first appearance. Shirley Henderson does an excellent job at portraying her, mainly in her vocal work. For example, she can be very deep at times, but can also make that horrific screech that I'm sure we all know and love. One little factoid that I have to put in here considering I review Doctor Who, she also plays Ursula in the 2006 episode entitled Love and Monsters. In the book, after their encounter with Moaning Myrtle, Percy finds them and deducts points from his own house for being in a forbidden area. I just don't understand it. What is it with Gryffindors taking points from their own bloody house? No wonder they always lose. Chris, mate, listen. Did the film you made the year before this just pop out of existence when you decided to have Harry speaking in Parseltongue? In Philosopher's Stone, he speaks plain English to the snake, and the snake understands. Why was it changed here? Like, I know he's around a group of people here as opposed to being left alone with the snake, but I just preferred it without having a group of sound designers thinking, wow, that really sounds like a snake sound effect. Let's chuck it over the gibberish Harry has to say. Harry even claims in the next scene he can't separate what he's saying from normal English. Speaking of the next scene, which was deleted, Harry sits on a cliff and Hedwig comes along. It's quite a beautiful shot actually. Music fits nicely, and then for some reason it fades into a profile shot and he says this.
Who am I, Hedwig? What am I?
I can now see why these two shots were deleted. As Harry abandons his friends in a place of study, he overhears some Hufflepuffs claiming Harry to be the heir of Slytherin. This is of course yet another deleted scene that leads to Harry bumping into Hagrid on the stairwell. You can tell they didn't put much effort into this scene because you can't even hear Hagrid's footsteps coming down the stairs before he appears in front of Harry. The dead rooster in his hand is because the cry of a rooster is supposed to be fatal to the basilisk. It is made more explicit in the book that Ginny, along with writing the messages, kills the roosters whilst under the influence of Riddle. I think certainly those little elements about the basilisk's weaknesses and what Ginny got up to outside of smearing blood all over the walls could have been included. Harry then stumbles across Justin and Nick, both petrified, who then gets sent to the headmaster's office. I really like that Dumbledore's password is Sherbet Lemon, something that I remember him talking to Professor McGonagall about in the first book. In my last video I spoke about region differences in the story of Harry Potter, specifically the titles, but I bet you didn't know that the American print of this segment in the book states the password to be Lemon Drop instead of Sherbet Lemon. I'm not sure if this is product placement or just plain odd. Fortunately in the film it's kept to Sherbet Lemon without an alternate edition as far as I'm aware. Up in Dumbledore's office, Fawkes combusts and it then becomes Christmas. We have a deleted scene with some okay child acting, but also displays the narcissism of Harry Potter's character, and plans start getting put into motion to infiltrate the Slytherin common room. Hey, Hermione, who holds a pair of coated muffins by the top parts like that? She also pulls out a vial of the hairs of Millicent Bulstrode, who we see introduced as Hermione's dueling partner earlier in the book. In this section they get into a physical fight and Hermione gets hair on her, presuming it's Bulstrode's own, instead of it just being magicked out of thin air as we assume it does in the film. Speaking of things that have been magicked out of thin air itself, there are a lot of sections that were in the book that highlight the reputation of the characters, as well as what's happening to the other characters that we know of. I briefly mentioned this in my initial review, specifically regarding the Weasley twins, but there are a lot of sections that mainly focus on the Weasleys and Malfoy that add a little depth to school life at Hogwarts, but become quite repetitive. For example, there is certainly a lot more Percy, as I mentioned before, but he gives off the impression that he sucks up to authority a lot, foreshadowing his joining of the Ministry. When reading this book and you want the story to progress, however, you have to sidetrack a little with these parts beforehand, which can be quite frustrating. But on the flip side, the Chamber of Secrets specifically focuses a lot on the themes of reputation and identity, so they aren't completely useless. Before we drug Draco's friends, on Christmas Day in the books, Harry receives another gift from the Dursleys. In the last video, I commented on how they know where to send the present. I had a comment telling me that, quote, Petunia once sent a letter to Dumbledore when she was a child begging him to let her attend, even though she is a muggle. This is explained in the 7th book, and explains how the Dursleys knew where to send the Christmas present for Harry. Interesting little factoid, so thank you, Clara Oswald. Upon drugging Crabbe and Goyle, we have another deleted scene involving them being dragged into a cupboard and then returning to the bathroom. A key part of the theatrical cut that is missing is how they acquire Slytherin uniforms so that they can pass for the people they transform into. I'm not really sure why it wasn't included, as it kind of doesn't make sense how they dressed like those individuals they transformed into without them. They drink the potion, and I thought this bubbling under the skin effect that's used is fantastic to watch. Points to the special effects department there from me. Harry and Ron managed to get into the Slytherin common room, and this is one of the few times I feel in film and TV that they've successfully created a dub without it looking crap. Normally the actors over-articulate, whilst the actor behind the voice booth uses their own voice and inflections. I'm not sure if these actors couldn't be bothered, or if they genuinely put some effort into their first 5 minutes of fame for this scene. Or maybe they're just bad actors. There's an excellent part of the script where Goyle claims Harry Potter to be worse than Dumbledore, which is brilliant considering it's not in the book, and it also shows that Harry would have made an adept Slytherin member. Speaking of the book, however, there's this beautiful part here where Ron, as Crabbe, is forced to read the Daily Prophet's article about his father's inquiry, who has fined 50 galleons that the Weasleys clearly can't afford considering Ron's reaction that's described. This part begins to show the oppressive nature of the Ministry and is an excellent part of the book. I assume this wasn't included considering the target audience and the lack of knowledge we have about Arthur's interests and employment in the film. They begin to transform back, and we have this interesting shot of Harry, Ron, Crabbe and Goyle meeting in the corridor. However, you'd have thought Harry and Ron would have locked the door so that this situation wouldn't happen. Back in the bathroom, Hermione has transformed into a cat whilst Harry and Ron find Riddle's diary. Harry then takes it to Hermione in the hospital in yet another deleted scene, and they deduce that the author of the diary was alive when the chamber was last opened. Harry tells a Spooky to bugger off in the common room, and speaking of spooky, that amazing music plays again from the first film when Harry was slipping around at night under his invisibility cloak. Once again, this creates an eerie and tense atmosphere as Harry starts messaging Tom Riddle through an early version of MSN. The text that is sent back and forth is a lot more detailed and descriptive in the book, but that just makes sense. You don't watch a film to read, that's what makes it stand apart from literature as an art form. Harry then gets sucked into the book, and I really appreciated the stylistic choice of making Harry coloured whilst the scene around him is not so much. We find out Hagrid was accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago, and that was the reason why he was expelled, which is really quite sad in the grand scheme of things, especially as Harry has been wrongly accused of so much in this story, so the sympathy levels are probably through the roof by this point. The music and Harry calling out Hagrid's name whilst being pulled back into reality is brilliantly constructed, and for once I feel the slow motion used here fits for dramatic effect. Normally I oppose it on the grounds it looks tacky, but it's only used for one frame, and it shows that Harry's realisation and brain processes lasted longer from his perspective than real time. In another deleted scene, Harry wakes up Ron to tell him what happened, who reacts, and then we carry on. I can definitely see why some scenes were removed, but I just want to know why this segment was even shot. It's completely pointless. A part of the book I probably should have mentioned earlier is Lockhart's morale booster on Valentine's Day, where in which he puts lots of fancy decorations about the Great Hall and himself, and then parades dwarfs into the room for entertainment, just like Joffrey in Game of Thrones. A brilliant part to read, but I've already explained possible reasons behind the lack of Lockhart in the film, so let's continue. The dormitory gets raided, Hermione gets petrified, Harry and Ron visit Hagrid. It's great that you can tell how terrified he is by the way he makes his tea. In the film, he overflows the cups, and in the book, he forgets to put a tea bag in and fills the cups with nothing but boiling water. The moment Lucius enters Hagrid's house changes the mood entirely. Hagrid gets angry, the spooky invisibility cloak music returns, once again creating the out-of-bed atmosphere I spoke of in my Philosopher's Stone review. Upon deciding to go into the dark forest and follow the spiders, you can hear Ron's voice breaking once again, and a lot more frequently in this segment, might I add too. There's a deleted scene where they find the car in an animalistic state before finding Aragog's Hollow, which isn't necessary but faithful to the book. I'm now going to pass you over to that nasty critic again to give you some more insight into what this scene looked like from the book's perspective.
Oh, thank you. In Aragog's Hollow, some of his children drag Harry, Ron and Fang to him instead of just stumbling on his hollow. There are some beautiful descriptions throughout this scene of pretty much what you see in the film. However, Aragog is described as the size of a small elephant, but in the film he seems a lot bigger than that.
Probably for aesthetic purposes.
Anyway, Aragog was also given a wife spider by Hagrid so all these other spiders could come to be, who was named Mozak. Now, if you don't mind, my waifu and I have video games to play and Marvel comics to read. Goodbye!
See you, Brian. From that part, I will say that this scene could have used more interesting sound design in that the spiders are part of the scenery here. It's described like the spiders react to the situation that's put before them. They click with applause like an audience, which would have been great to see. What they did do, however, with the vocal work of Julian Glover, whose roles tend to be completely the opposite to that of Aragog, was excellent. The atmosphere, the set design, all excellent. The low and husky voice as well as the design of Aragog himself make the scene especially scary for younger viewers and tense and exciting for older viewers. Ron's voice breaking then attracts the spiders and we have this awesome shot of them all coming down to get them, just as Aragog says one of my favourite lines in the film.
Goodbye, friend of Hagrid.
The car then comes to the rescue and Fang gets into the car twice. We have an exciting sequence of events involving spiders, voices breaking, and more spiders as they escape the forest, establishing that Hagrid never opened the Chamber of Secrets, where Daniel Radcliffe's self-realisation of this isn't that badly acted. We find out that the monster from the Chamber of Secrets is a basilisk, a serpent that slithers through the pipes. What I don't quite get though is why Harry can hear the snake slithering around but not anybody else. Even outside the diegesis we can hear the voice and slithering. Surely the others can hear those noises too, as well as maybe hissing that Harry can translate. The final message gets smeared onto the wall and the staff all hurry to see it in this corridor. I think it's great that Lockhart's charm and naivety have built up to this point until he really must act about the problem, and when it's staring at him in the face, he is practically speechless. Even the other teachers are aware of this when they look at him dead in the eye about his wonderful feats that they clearly knew all along he made up. Harry and Ron convince Lockhart to go down with them into the chamber and Harry says more stupid parcel tongue. I think these scenes that follow are fantastic in terms of shot composition, music and set design. They're just ruined by that stupid voice we hear come out of Harry and Tom Riddle's mouths. When Lockhart tries to escape, he decides to run into the two of them instead of just running behind Ron to his right. I know he's a bit of an idiot, but come on, you wouldn't run into a wall if there was a way around it given the choice. They jump down the tunnel and I always thought that it would be so much fun going down these chutes as a child, even if there wasn't really any logical way of coming back to the top and doing it all over again. After more prepubescent screaming, they reunite with Lockhart and search for Ginny and the snake. When they find the snakeskin, I can't help but feel this scene could have been a lot darker. Like, where is this light coming from? Is it sunlight? Surely they could cast Lumos or have had some kind of magic motion sensitive flames like they do have on the third floor, but then again it's highly unlikely somebody would come down here, so there'd be no reason really to set up such a system. Lockhart's dialogue post-memory charm doesn't happen until after Harry's encounter with Tom Riddle in the books, but I'll talk about that now because I can. I think his change of character is excellent and a fitting ending for his character arc. Branagh gives out a comedic performance that wraps up his character perfectly, especially when they're flying away on Fawkes and he screams,
This is just like magic!
Harry then enters the chamber with more stupid snake talk, and we have this beautiful establishing shot of the chamber itself. The set designers once again have my full appreciation for the effort they put in this film, and I loved how damp and hideous it looks. It certainly does the book justice, and the music brings the tension to the forefront once again. Ginny is seen dying on the floor, whilst Tom's ghostly apparition comes out to taunt Harry. We have a short flashback of Ginny performing the acts Tom couldn't, which is shot using a technique I don't know what it is called, but involves warping the lens as shown here. If anybody knows what this is called, please comment below, I'd love to know. Tom Riddle certainly plays a very cold character, but I think he could have done more, certainly by laughing maniacally like he does in the books, as it would have made his character more interesting to say the least. When Tom rearranges his name, I think it's once again another fantastic reveal that Rowling leaves right until the very end. I must assume that Marvolo was a name made up to fit the anagram, though it is very similar to that of the Latin name Malvolio, meaning ill will. A great twist nonetheless, and another fantastically unexpected turn in the story, though it would have been cool if Riddle was another bad Slytherin that worked for Voldemort or something like that too. Not a problem at all. As we find out later, the diary was part of Voldemort as a Horcrux anyway. When Tom talks about his Muggle father's name, an interesting little factoid for you that the book led me to conclude was that Tom's father left before he was born due to the knowledge that Tom's mother was a witch. Fawkes then arrives in the chamber and the colour of the bird really contrasts to the dark, murky greens of the room, Great design choice there. The Mahusive snake then slithers its way into the chamber from the beautiful facial statue on a wall thing, and it too reflects the horrible murky colours of its surroundings. The CG team once again get a massive thumbs up from me for designing such a beautifully horrifying creation. It still holds out compared to today's standards, and it looks pretty realistic too. There's unfortunately one little snag in this shot here where the head god modes through the floor when trying to attack Harry. This scene is obviously quite intense and fantastic considering its length and build-up that's led up to where we are now. The intensity particularly peaks when Harry gets cornered by the snake scene here, as the music completely stops and all we hear is the snarls of the beast. It buggers off and Harry makes another attempt to wake up Ginny, whilst Tom taunts him further. The snake then gracefully bursts through the water and the sword of Godric Gryffindor appears. I think the biggest thing that I appreciate about this scene is that not everything is just conveniently handed to Harry like in the previous installment. He does have to use his knowledge and physical capabilities to his advantage. For example, Fawkes doesn't come swooping in with the sword in its mouth and stabs the snake while it's being swallowed or something ridiculous like that. I know that the group proved themselves in Philosopher's Stone by passing the trial rooms leading to the Mirror of Erised in their own ways, but this scene just takes the cake considering all it took for Harry to defeat Quirrell was to touch him a few times. Harry then takes a nice big PG-rated stab through the basilisk's skull and gets a tooth stuck in his arm. That snake really should have seen a dentist. That's some serious gum disease right there. I think I'll definitely say that this sequence in the book wasn't nearly as exciting as it was watching it in the film, as it ends rather quickly in the book and there's no sequence in the tunnel or climbing on the head of Slytherin either. Harry then stabs the diary and we have this climatically beautiful destruction of the Tom Riddle ghost, separating and exploding with light from all parts coming away from him. I remember this part being quite terrifying when I was younger, but I think it's quite the, excuse my French, fuck yeah moment in the film that we can't help but feel relieved that it's all over. We get a closer look at the Phoenix and I'm not sure if it's CG or a real bird or a puppet that was designed for this part, but either way, cracking job whoever got that brilliantly coloured bird together. It heals Harry and I can't help but feel Ginny could have been a little more emotional over her experience. She cries in the book, but God forbid if we have a child cry on film, it's not exactly like it's perfectly normal for them to do that. Harry then says this.
It's over. It's just a memory.
Jesus, could you get any more cheesy and cliche? Fawkes then rescues them all and there seems to be a whole section where Harry explains everything that happened to the Weasley parents who were called in regarding their daughter being taken into the chamber, McGonagall and Dumbledore missing. It was probably missing considering that we as an audience have witnessed the events Harry describes, so we don't need to hear him retell them all over again really. Harry and Ron are awarded special awards for service to the school, whatever that means, but it's better than receiving house points alone, like in Philosopher's Stone. Lucius then barges in with Dobby at his side, but Dumbledore is completely prepared for what he's about to say about Malfoy's threats to curse the families of the governors who didn't agree to rid the school of Dumbledore. If we know anything, justice is swift. Lucius loses his place on the Board of Governors for the school as the book finishes, which is once again a very fitting ending to his character arc. They then use the lighting device they have on the bad guy in Rear Window placed on Lucius, and then they leave. Harry then chases after them and Dobby is freed. Lucius really doesn't think through what he's doing when he gets mad. He begins the Avada Kedavra spell, but Dobby stops him and Lucius leaves. I always thought that the spell sounded like a parody of some sort on the spell Abracadabra. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but I'm sure there's an answer out there somewhere. Comes out of hospital and puts Ron in the friend zone. Exams are cancelled and Hagrid returns to Hogwarts, and this final section where he returns is just lovely. Mainly because of the music, but because of Coltrane once again providing a lovable performance. There's such a lovely hug between Harry and Hagrid here as well. Hermione and Hagrid welling up, everyone's applauding him. Except for this guy. Good God, I've never seen somebody look so smug. But yeah, this is a fantastic final closing shot. Really wonderful conclusion to the film. So, did it suck? Oh wait, hold on. What's that? I've got something else to say? Oh yeah, that. Unfortunately, Harry still has to stay at the Dursleys. Again. Jesus, JK is so mean to the boy. Give him a break. My final opinion after all that noise and chaos is that I think the novelisation of this story takes the lead here because compared to the Philosopher's Stone, there's a lot more missing that I think could have made the film a lot more interesting. But it does it justice nonetheless. I also felt the book was a lot more addictive and interesting than the first, as it doesn't have to introduce everything in the great detail that I already established, so I give the Chamber of Secrets book a 9 out of 10 and the film an 8 out of 10. fuck me, I'm sweaty. But just a little Easter egg for anybody that's interested. Interested. I would argue that... I'd argue... Arthel. Oh, no. I'll deal with you later. Fucking hell, this is the worst line I've ever written. It's because there's certainly something slightly... Ooh, certainly slightly something.
Professor Dumbledore. Professor McGonagall.
I mean, neither Filch or Snape get an introductory... I mean, neither Filch or Snape get an introductory She comes towards the class, followed by Lockhart, claiming she showed her... She comes towards the class, followed by Lockhart, claiming he showed her how to tree the tree. Wow, I sounded fucking sexy there.
Filch releases him and Harry and nobody else.
What's so funny?
I can make a rhyme out of that. Tat.
Oh my god. Dumbledore! I can imagine this bit... Oh, fuck. What the fuck did I even just say? But... I think it's another fantastic reveal that once again... No. When Tom rearranges his name, I think it's once again... Oh my... Fuck. When Tom touches his dick. The intense...